Welcome back to another episode of Before You Buy, the show where we give you some straight-up gameplay and our first impressions of the latest games releasing. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, a nice little surprise for you. Ninja Gaiden 2 Black just got shadow dropped alongside Ninja Gaiden 4's reveal, and it promises to be a more faithful recreation of the original compared to the version we got in the Master Collection, which is good because that Master Collection version wasn't. It was kind of the worst of both worlds. It wasn't faithful to the original version of Ninja Gaiden 2 or the PlayStation 3 Sigma re-release. Instead, it was basically the Sigma 2 version with some of the better features ripped out and the things that made it worse than the OG version left in. So Ninja Gaiden 2 Black is meant to remedy all of this with the for real this time definitive version of the game, or at least that's how Koei Tecmo is selling it. But unfortunately, it's not. Instead of just being an enhanced version of the original game you'd assume from the name, it's actually a modified and improved version of Sigma 2. It's taking the framework of a game they already released back in 2021 and doing what they can with it to bring it closer in spirit to the Xbox 360 original, which fans mostly agree is the best version of the game, and they still managed to miss the mark somewhat. It's ultimately a solid remaster overall, but it's just not as good as it could have been. It wouldn't have been that big of a deal if this was just a free update to the Master Collection or something, but this is a $50 game. And you don't get a discount if you own the Master Collection. At that price, it needs to be the ultimate version of Ninja Gaiden 2, and it's not. It's close. I'm not going to say it's not close. It's definitely the best we have of the remakes of the game so far, but it's not quite there yet. The problem with talking about Ninja Gaiden 2 is that every version of the game is flawed in some way. You got the Xbox 360 original that's often thought of as the true version of the game, but even that has annoying problems like an inconsistent frame rate, really flat, ugly environmental design, etc., etc. It's the only version of the game to have the terrible Deathworm Queen boss fight, which is not an exaggeration, one of the worst boss fights of all time. They just straight up removed it from all later versions. That's how bad this was. The Sigma 2 version added a few things like some new but not very fun bosses like the Buddha statue and the Statue of Liberty. Yes, you did hear that right. I come from the land down under, a completely different era in which stuff like that happened. Unfortunately, as much as it is very fun to have the Statue of Liberty as a boss, it's actually not that fun of a boss. And some extra levels where you get to play as Momiji, Rachel, and Ayana. But that version also lowered the enemy density pretty significantly, made all the remaining enemies tankier and less aggressive, and also removed all the over-the-top gore, which was a staple of the original game. The version in the Master Collection was just Sigma 2 with a bunch of stuff cut. Kept the crappy new bosses, but cut the extra playable characters, which were actually good additions. It also kept the less aggressive enemies that appeared in smaller groups, so yeah, worst of both worlds. All it really had going for it was a more stable frame rate and a higher resolution compared to the other versions. And, I mean, that's not nothing, but it wasn't what it should have been. So now we got Ninja Gaiden 2 Black, where the violence has been restored. That's kind of one of the more important aspects of it, honestly. We haven't had that since the original version of the game. But there's more enemies that can appear on screen at once. They're generally more aggressive than they were in any of the Sigma versions. And the extra cut chapters, they've been restored. The game is running on Unreal Engine 5, basically, kind of. It's Unreal running on top of the base game. I think it's that asset injection thing that they do that allowed for that amazing Portal remake. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that's what it is. But it is how we know it's running off the Sigma version. I assume the visuals would get a touch-up, but actually in some areas they've been pretty significantly improved. Now, it's not a complete remaster. It's mostly new lighting, new effects, higher resolution textures, but it does make for a pretty stark improvement in places. The parts of the game that already looked good, like the first level and the Ninja Village, actually look fantastic now. And places that were more barren and boring, like New York City, which was dull and empty in the original, they look a lot better. The addition of some moody fog, some reflective surfaces, and the neon lights, it really does a lot to make the entire section of the game pop. Like, it looks so much better, it's hard to believe it's the same game, even. Some parts, they really just couldn't salvage, like the sewers. There's just not much to be done there. But for the most part, Ninja Gaiden 2 Black is the best this game has ever looked by, I mean, not even a small amount. It's a large amount. The only thing that sucks is it's still locked at either 60 or 30 frames per second. You can't play at an unlocked frame rate, which is not great for such a fast-paced action game. Along with the Unreal upgrade, the violence is another big selling point, and yeah, it's as over the top as the original. It was kind of weird not to have it in the Sigma versions, but the level of destruction you can inflict on enemies in this game is just something to behold. You're routinely sending legs and arms and heads flying, just just blendering bad guys to death in a tornado of violence that might sound unnecessary on paper, but really does make the game better. I would not normally say something like that, but it's just true here. It made sense in the original, and it did not make sense to have it removed in the Sigma version. So, I don't know what else to say about it. I'm happy it's back. What isn't great is that the enemy counts do not match the original. The levels don't feel as empty as Sigma 2, but it's still not on the detail of the original game in terms of enemy counts. Same with enemy aggressiveness. It's definitely more aggressive here than in Sigma, but the game feels easier than the base game. The level of projectile spam, it's not the same. Enemies don't gang up on you quite as much. It's not a massive difference. It is much better than the Master Collection Sigma version, but they're calling this Ninja Gaiden 2 Black. So, I mean, they are trying to separate from the Sigma label, at least to some extent. So give us an upgraded version of the original if you're actually doing that. But it is kind of a hack attempt to fix Sigma 2. And if you recall back in, I think it was 2021 or something like that, the devs publicly said that the source code for Ninja Gaiden 1 and 2, or rather Ninja Gaiden Black and Ninja Gaiden 2, was completely lost. Like there wasn't any way to salvage it. So we're kind of stuck with Sigma. So on some level, I understand what they're trying to do. They're basically trying to transform Sigma into Ninja Gaiden 2. And for the most part, they're doing a decent job of it. And an important thing to keep in mind is that at the end of the day, this is all, it's kind of fanboy nitpicking. If you're new to the games, I would 100% recommend playing Black. It's the best looking and running version of Ninja Gaiden 2. It's also the most fun to play. It's a good remaster of a flawed game. So, I mean, it's so close to being the definitive version, but it's not quite there. I mean, what's so flawed about Ninja Gaiden 2 in the first place? It's a game I like a lot. The combat is probably the series' best. There's a ton of weapons. They're all a ton of fun to use. A huge variety of enemies are out there to kill. There's a few innovative changes to the formula, like a refilling health meter where you can suffer red scratch damage. It's a good system, and being able to use health items on the fly or switch weapons without having to dig through a menu. They're all good changes from the original Ninja Gaiden. But while the core gameplay is excellent, there's a few parts of the original Ninja Gaiden 2 that feel kind of slapdash. After the first two excellent levels, you get dumped into New York, which is a bunch of huge empty corridors awkwardly stitched together. And in general, a lot of the later levels aren't that interesting or fun to explore, just a way to funnel you to the next combat encounter. Black loses one truly awful boss, but that doesn't mean it's free of lame bosses. Stuff like Giaden is still there. And given a somehow even goofier new name, but it's the same old silver piece of crap. The water dragon is unchanged. Still just a damage race where you stand in place spamming projectiles to see who dies first. Even some of the major end-of-level bosses are pretty lame and can be destroyed in seconds. This game has a weirdly inconsistent difficulty curve. Sometimes it's brutally hard, sometimes it's crazy easy. Enemies that should be more dangerous often are not. The big intimidating demon enemies are actually the easiest somehow. Legitimately, I'm not exaggerating at all. And somehow the standard ninja mooks, the most common enemies, are the most deadly enemies in the whole game. You'd think things would get harder with the introduction of demon enemies, but for the most part, they're easier than the stuff you're fighting in level 1. These aren't inexcusable issues or anything, just the observations from someone who's played Ninja Gaiden 2 a ton over the years in many different forms. Black has made some other changes. The statue bosses from Sigma 2 are gone, and if you ask me, that's fine. They didn't add much other than the novelty factor of a boss fight with the Statue of Liberty. Hoo-hoo, the Statue of Liberty, it's a boss now. Like I said, it's fun on paper. It seems like a funny thing to do. It's not actually that great, though. But some of the other Sigma changes are here, like the Black Dragon boss. I did mention the 3 bonus characters are back, and they are an absolute welcome addition. They're not in the game a lot or anything, but each one's level blasts by for maybe 20 minutes or so. That doesn't mean they're not still fun to play as, and the new boss encounters are some of the best in the game. They're a lot more carefully designed and elaborate than most of the bosses in the base game. Even with them, there are some things that are still missing, like some bonus costumes. Not that it really matters, because these characters are barely in the game as it is, but it is another example of how inconsistent this version of the game can be. Another change from Sigma 2 that's I'm still torn on is that the nuclear armadillo doesn't kill you instantly anymore if you don't block after the boss dies. It's obviously a BS beginner's trap, but it was also funny. At least I thought it was funny. So I don't know. I'd be okay if they restored that. It's not like the boss is that hard or takes long to fight. I feel like we just all accept hard games now, so who would really complain? I don't know. They did a few more things in an attempt to mitigate the game's original punishing difficulty, like adding a hero-style mode that mostly feels unnecessary, because they already changed difficulties on the original, called the old easy mode normal now, and call what used to be normal hard. Frankly, compared to how brutal modern games are, the hard isn't really that unforgiving. It's challenging, but it only gets truly difficult when you play on the highest difficulty, and that's when the game stops messing around. Overall, Ninja Gaiden 2 Black is good. I have spent a lot of time complaining and nitpicking all the little changes because that's really what there is to talk about. It's not a complete overhaul of the game. The visual improvements alone make it a lot more than just a standard port job, but when you're talking about the actual meat of the game, it's still the same game. It's got some tweaks here and there. It's a good game with notable flaws. Black fixes some of them, and some are just part of the Ninja Gaiden 2 experience, and you're not going to be able to do anything about it. Every time I come back to this game, I do end up liking it a little more, warts and all. The more I play it and actually engage with the complexities, using more of the game's expansive arsenal, and better come to grips with the mechanics, the more I enjoy it. The combat is absolutely fantastic, as I mentioned earlier. It's absurdly violent, satisfying as hell. Once you really get the hang of it, it's really good. There is quirkiness. There's enemies that'll spawn out of nowhere right next to you, or some annoying, inconsistent platforming sections, or anytime the ghost piranhas show up. I don't think I need to describe something beyond the words ghost piranhas. It's one of the most annoying enemies of all time, and they're in one of the most annoying locations of all time, and you're forced to kill them in order to progress. Some of the design decisions in Ninja Gaiden 2 are kind of baffling, but it's also these weird, dumb, and frustrating things that do give this game its character. It's like poison swamps in a Dark Souls game. They're awful. They unequivocally suck. They're terrible. But, they're part of it. That's part of Dark Souls, and the weird crap is part of Ninja Gaiden 2. And it is odd in a lot of ways, but it does just work. It's a shame they can't seem to put together a perfect version, but at this point, Black is the best one we've gotten. It's not the definitive version of the game, but taken as a whole, it comes out on top. Even with some annoying stuttering issues between loading zones on PC, it's overpriced and the file size is crazy. 80 gigabytes for Ninja Gaiden 2. Want to know how big the Master Collection version was? 4 gigabytes. 4. But also that's what you get with some modern visual upgrades. If you play this one, I'd play it on Game Pass or wait for a discount. $50 it's too high for what you're getting here, especially if you already have the Master Collection version. It is my favorite version of Ninja Gaiden 2 yet, and with PC mods, it may eventually become the true definitive version of the game. Just do not pay full price for it. Seriously, $50 is too much for a game this old, regardless of what they've done to it. And that's all for today. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable notifications, and as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter and book me on Cameo at Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time right here on gameranx.